Good morning. I'm Ronnie Levy, and I'd like to talk to you about rice for the 21 season. As all of you know, a lot of things happened this past year, but we're going to talk about some of the things that are important to you. Last year, we had about 475,000 acres in Louisiana. This was an increase of approximately 14%. As you can see, many of the parishes that were the large parishes in rice production have continued to produce rice this past year. But we did see that increase primarily in North Louisiana. Long grain varieties, the CL 153 was our main variety that we grew last year, with almost 20% of the acres in that one variety. While there'll be limited supply of that variety, we have a replacement. You'll hear about that from Dr. Famosa. It's going to be the CLL 17. So it'll be a little bit different in the system, but again, we'll see a lot of acres produced this year, although there is a somewhat limited supply of seed. We talk about medium grain. The Jupiter was the primary rice that was grown this past year, but as you can see, we've reduced medium grain over the last several years to where we're down to about 10% of our total rice is in medium grain, with Jupiter taking almost 85% of that acres. We do have a little bit of our Clearfield MO4 that's being grown, and we'll probably see an increase in those acres again this year as well. We talk about hybrids versus our other lines. We have about 33% of our acres was in hybrids, and of that, 65% of that was a Clearfield type hybrid. This is the one we'll talk a little bit more about, is furrow irrigated rice. As you know, we've had a big interest in furrow irrigated rice. We've actually over doubled that every year since we started keeping records of furrow irrigated rice. In North Louisiana, it fits in well with soybean, corn rotations. And because of the price drops in some of these other crops, we've seen more interest in rice production in these row type areas. Again, we look to see an increase. Duck hunting has become very popular in those areas. So this crop is something that will be very favorable to duck hunters in the North Louisiana area. We don't see a lot of it in South Louisiana. There are some issues that we'll talk about in North Louisiana, but we really see very little of it in South Louisiana because we're really just not suited for row type crops here. This past year, we'll talk a little bit about something that happened last year, just to give you an idea of how those things affect how our crop produces and our yields. Last year, we had most of our rice planted in early March. We had a very warm spring. This created a real good environment for early planting. Rice was off to a good start. We had excellent stands, and we looked like at the beginning we were going to have a record-setting year. Rice looked wonderful throughout the state. We did have a little bit of problems in North Louisiana. There were some big storms that came through and flooded some areas, so it did delay planting in some of those areas. I guess the biggest thing, and this was the thing that everyone was very concerned about, was hurricanes. We had Hurricane Laura hit South Louisiana on August the 27th. The thing that was good in South Louisiana is most of the rice had been harvested by the time that this storm came through. But even though that the rice was harvested, there was still a lot of damage because bins, some of the facilities caused damage, electricity was out. So it did cause some major concerns. We did lose some rice. There was an estimated $28 million damage to the rice industry. North Louisiana was a little bit worse than us because a lot of their rice was either in the flowering stage, the stuff that they got planted late, or it was in the almost ready to harvest stage and the stuff that got planted fairly early. So they were at a point where they lost a lot of rice that actually went down. If you look at the picture, you'll see a lot of this rice was lodged, and that's terrible as far as trying to harvest lodged rice. A lot of times it started to sprout, and a lot of these fields weren't able to be harvested. Then, unknowingly, after we got the first crop and we thought we were through with hurricanes, we had Hurricane Delta came in, and this was in October, early October, and it had a big impact on our second crop. We had a lot of second crop that we had a lot of shattering from the amount of wind damage that we had in the major rice producing area of Louisiana, in the Acadia, Vermilion, Jeff Davis area. Although we talk about the hurricanes and how bad it was, we still had a very favorable harvest when we consider that most of the rice got harvested before the hurricane. If you look at this graph, you'll see that we averaged 7,130 pounds per acre, which was not a record yield, but it was a very good yield considering the conditions we had this year. But we actually had one of our highest production records with 33.9 million hundredweights. This was up 30% due to the increase in acres throughout the state. When we talk about rice production, there was a few things that I wanted to tell you. I mean, you're going to hear about variety selection, diseases, insects, but the things that are important are your production practices and when you do them. I guess the main thing I want to tell you is don't be late. We start talking about don't be late, we say don't start late. You need to have your fields prepared in advance of when you want to plant. A lot of the spring, this past year after rice harvest, we were able to get in the fields, so most of the rice fields should be ready to be planted. If you wait and delay, then you're going to have to delay your planting, so when weather conditions get favorable for planting, that's when you're going to be starting your production or your field work. So get your fields ready and on time. Don't plant late. Dr. Linscomb and all of our data planting studies show if we can get planted earlier, then we will reduce our disease pressures, our insect pressure. We have less problems with panicle blight and some of these other things that are brought about by extremely hot temperatures. Rice is very sensitive to hot night temperatures. That's one of the things that will cause some major yield loss and quality, and also create some other issues with panicle blight and some of the things associated with warm night temperatures. Don't fertilize late. A lot of times we go out and by the time we see that we have a problem or we hadn't fertilized on time, then we're not going to make up that yield loss by fertilizing late. The rice may turn green, but if we start to get that yellowing or if we hadn't put out our fertilizer at the proper timings, then we're going to have considerable losses. Don't spray late. A lot of times, like Dr. Groth has said in the past, if we spray for diseases, if we don't spray at the proper timing, then we're not going to get the control. The fungicides have to be put on at the proper time. Same thing with insects. If we leave the insects out there for longer periods, then they're going to do considerable damage before we actually control them. And then the next one is don't harvest late. If you think about it, when we let the rice dry in the field and get to a lower harvest moisture, then we have potential for rainfall during that period. We get some quality loss, we get shattering. There's a lot of things that can happen, and if we can harvest before we get some bad weather on those crops, then typically we will increase our milling quality and we'll also increase our yields and have the potential for a good return crop. And the last thing is always remember that Mother Nature wins. A lot of times we can do everything correctly, we can get a beautiful crop out there, and if Mother Nature doesn't cooperate, then a lot of times we are at her mercy as far as what's going to happen with our crop. But if we do those things, if we plant on time, we harvest on time, then typically we will have good results with our rice crop. In 21, I think we're going to have slightly higher rice acres in Louisiana, probably about 10 to 15,000 acre increase. We'll probably see a majority of that in North Louisiana with some row rice, but again, we'll probably have a slight increase in South Louisiana as well. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the rice verification program. This past year, Dr. Dustin Harrell conducted it with the help of Mr. Keith Fontenot. And just give you a little bit of the things that went on with the rice verification program. We'd like to thank rice producers and the Rice Promotion Board and Research Board for funding this project. Last year we had intended on 5 parishes, but only 4 parishes were able to get planted because we had some flooding. We talked about that storm in North Louisiana. The flooding, we weren't able to get in as quickly as we would like, so we actually decided not to plant in the Morehouse area. In Acadia Parish, we had a producer, Jonathan Rocket, Jeremy Creighton in Evangeline Parish, Jeff Davis had a Dial in Benoit, and then Aaron Lee was in Vermilion parishes. Some of those were their first year in the program, so they'll be in the program again this next year. Usually we like to have them in the program for a couple of years. You can see some of the management practices that were done as far as fertility-wise and how they planted. You can look at some different growth stages, how long it took for those fields to mature. This is actually in producers' fields. So we feel like it gives us some additional information to help management decisions and see where we need to do additional research. Also, we have the harvest data, so you can see how those fields actually perform under those conditions. We have a lot more information that's available on the web. You can go and look at the verification information at the LSU AgCenter website. Under rice, you'll be able to find the verification program. We also looked at what seed treatments were used on the different fields. You can look at those as well. Planting methods. 3 of the 4 were water planted. Although most of the rice now, we've seen a big shift in from water planting to drill seeded. These fields were actually mostly water seeded. Water managed, how they were managed as well. We looked at the herbicide applications that were used for weed control, fertility, fungicide applications. So most of them did receive applications of fungicides. The one thing, stink bug application, we did have one field that reached a level, but because of crawfish, it wasn't treated and they had very little damage. Harvesting conditions, and then none of the verification fields were actually ratoon crop. A lot of years we do have ratoon crop fields, but again, this past year, all of the fields were put into crawfish production, so we didn't have a ratoon crop. For next year, we plan to have approximately the same 5 fields if we can get it planted in time. Again, Acadia, Evangeline, Vermilion, Allen. We'd like to have at least 1 in North Louisiana and possibly 2. And we'd like to, again, to thank the rice producers and the Rice Research Board for funding this very producer-oriented program. It does give us a lot of information and insight to the research practices that are conducted here on the station. Also, I'd like to thank you. I look forward to working with all of you this year. If you have a problem that I can help you with, I'd be glad to come out to your farm, look and hopefully either help you or find some of our specialists, other specialists that can help you with your needs. My contact information is here. My cell phone number is listed. You can contact the Rice Research Station if you can't find me, but most people still know how to find me. Look forward to working with you and hopefully a very productive 2021. Thank you.